Get ready to learn the story of Cain and Abel like you've never heard before. From the moment Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden to the first murder in human history, this narrative reveals profound and shocking details about two brothers who followed opposite paths. Why did God accept Abel's offering and reject Cain's? What really happened at the time of the crime? And what was Cain's true legacy? With an engaging and detailed narrative, this video will transport you directly to the beginnings of humanity and show how one man's choices can echo through generations. Watch until the end and discover the truth behind this impressive biblical story. So let's get to the video. But first, just make sure you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, bringing you stories and biblical accounts that you haven't heard yet. The origin of the first family. The Garden of Eden was behind them. What had once been a paradise of direct communion with God was now just a distant memory for Adam and Eve. They longed for that perfect place where they walked side by side with the Creator. But the reality was harsh. Outside the garden, the soil was barren. Thorns and weeds sprouted among the crops, and sweat ran down Adam's face every time he worked the land. Eve, in turn, felt the pains of life outside Eden. The difficulties increased, but in the midst of this new world full of challenges, she also carried hope within herself. As time passed, her womb began to grow. God had promised that her offspring would bring a redeemer, someone who would crush the serpent and bring restoration. Could this son be the chosen one? And then the day arrived. With pain she had never experienced before, Eve gave birth to her first son. As she held the baby in her arms, her heart filled with joy and anticipation. She named him Cain, a name that means acquired or possessed, because she believed that this boy was a gift from God. Time passed, and years later, another son was born. His name, Abel. Unlike Cain, Abel seemed quieter, more introspective. The two grew up together, learning about the world and God from their parents. But as the years passed, their personalities and interests began to differ. Cain loved the land. From an early age, he helped Adam cultivate the soil, watching the plants grow and learning how to care for the crops. He would become a farmer, someone who would work hard to provide for his family from the land. Abel, on the other hand, seemed to have a heart for animals. He felt at home among the flocks, watching the behavior of the sheep and learning how to care for them with patience and affection. Over time, he became a shepherd, responsible for the family's livestock. Two brothers, two paths. Both were children of the first humans created by God, but their destinies would soon take tragic turns. The story of the first family was just beginning. The destiny of each brother time passed, and the children of Adam and Eve grew up. Since they were little, Cain and Abel had heard stories about Eden, that wonderful place where their parents had lived before they were expelled. A perfect garden, where God walked with man and everything was full and without pain. But now the reality was different. Outside the garden, life required effort, hard work, and sacrifice. Cain, the firstborn, learned from an early age to work the land. He watched his father, Adam, plow the soil, plant seeds, and wait patiently for the harvest. Over time, he became a strong man, with calloused hands, accustomed to the weight of the hoe and the heat of the scorching sun. The sweat that ran down his face was the price of survival. His world was made of deep roots, of seeds thrown into the ground, and of daily care to ensure that the fruit sprouted. He learned to understand the cycles of nature, the right time to plant, the time to harvest, the fight against pests, and the wait for the rain that sometimes took a long time to fall. Abel, on the other hand, followed a different path. From an early age, he showed a special affinity with animals. He observed the sheep, learned their habits, and knew how to distinguish when they were sick or healthy. He was patient and careful, guiding the flocks to the best pastures and water sources. While Cain worked under the hot sun, bending over the earth, Abel walked through the green fields, listening to the bleating of the sheep and feeling the wind touch his face. The brothers grew up side by side, but their trades took them to different worlds. Cain saw the fruit of his work sprout from the soil, while Abel saw life grow around him, multiplying in lambs that were born under his watchful eye. Two men, two destinies, linked by the same blood, but separated by something much deeper than just their occupations. What they didn't know yet was that their choices and their attitudes, before God would lead them on a path of no return, changing the history of humanity forever. God is pleased with Abel's silence hung in the air as the brothers waited for God's answer. Abel's offering, the perfect lamb, lay on the altar. The blood dripped down, soaking into the earth, a testament to his faith and obedience. Cain's offering, the fruits of the earth, lay nearby, colorful and showy, the fruit of his sweat and labor. Both waited anxiously for what would happen. Then something extraordinary happened. The Lord looked upon Abel and his offering with favor. Somehow, Abel felt divine approval in his heart. Perhaps a supernatural flame consumed the sacrifice on the altar, as would happen years later with other faithful servants of God. Perhaps it was a deep sense of peace that took hold of his being, an unshakable certainty that God had accepted his offering. His heart filled with joy. Not only had he given the best he had, but he had given it in faith, recognizing that everything belonged to the Lord. But Cain realized something different. His offering was not accepted in the same way. He looked at the fruits and grains he had brought, expecting the same approval his brother had received. But nothing happened. No sign from the heavens, no flame, no feeling of approval. God's silence weighed on him like an invisible burden. His heart began to fill with a feeling he had never experienced before. At first it was a slight uneasiness, a doubt. But this doubt soon turned into frustration. He thought to himself, why wasn't my offering accepted? I worked hard too. I also brought the fruit of my sweat. This isn't fair. And then, the frustration became something worse. His gaze shifted to Abel, who stood there serene, humble, grateful. And inside Cain, the seed of resentment began to sprout. Just imagine. You do something thinking it's right, but God doesn't accept it. What would you do in Cain's place? Did he have a second chance? I would really like to hear your opinion in the comments. Anger grows in Cain's heart. Cain's gaze was fixed on the altar. The silence that hung over his offering seemed like an invisible judgment. The fire did not descend, no answer came from the heavens, and within him a storm began to form. His fists clenched slowly, his muscles tensed, and a burning sensation rose in his face. He looked at Abel. His brother was serene, his eyes turned to the heavens, as if he were in communion with God. The flame of acceptance shone in his offering, and Abel seemed satisfied, humble, and at peace. But to Cain it was like a dagger piercing his chest. Why? The question hammered in his mind. He had worked hard, day after day, cultivating that cursed land. Every fruit, every grain was the fruit of his sweat, of his effort. And yet God did not accept his offering as he had accepted Abel's. Envy began to take root in his heart. That bitter, corrosive feeling made him feel inferior, less worthy. But instead of trying to understand what God wanted, instead of looking inside himself and reflecting on his own attitude, Cain chose another path: rebellion. His thoughts became dark. His view of Abel changed. Before, he saw his brother as a companion, as family. Now he saw a rival, an obstacle, someone who in some way made him feel humiliated. What irritated him the most was not only the rejected offering, but Abel's calm gaze, the way he continued without any arrogance, without any provocation. Cain's anger grew like an uncontrollable fire. It was a new, unknown, but powerful feeling. And as he fed this anger without realizing it, he moved even further away from the presence of God and got closer to a tragic and irreversible destiny. God's warning to Cain was restless. His mind was seething with dark thoughts, his breathing was heavy, and his heart was beating fast. The rejection of his offering still burned inside him like an open wound. He avoided looking at Abel, and avoided even more thinking about what his rejected offering meant. But deep down he knew that there was something wrong inside him. It was then that, in the midst of his anguish, God spoke to Cain. The Creator's voice did not come like thunder. It did not come as an immediate judgment, but rather as a call. a loving warning. God saw what was happening inside Cain. He saw the anger growing like a poison, and in his mercy he tried to reach him before it was too late. "Why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen?" God's voice echoed inside Cain, not as an accusation but as an invitation to reflect. Cain was so consumed by jealousy and frustration that he did not even notice how his expression had changed. His face was grim, full of resentment. His posture was no longer the same, and his thoughts were taking a dangerous path. "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" God gave him a chance, an opportunity to change, to correct himself, to look inside himself and understand the real problem. God's acceptance was not arbitrary. Cain could indeed be accepted, but he needed to understand that it was not enough to bring any offering. It was necessary to offer it with faith, with humility, with his heart in the right place. But then came the warning. "If you do not do what is right, sin crouches at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Sin was lurking, like a silent predator, ready to attack. God saw what Cain perhaps did not yet fully understand. His anger was not just a passing feeling. If he was not careful, it would completely dominate him. Sin did not just want to visit him, it wanted to rule over him. He wanted to change him. The Creator was telling Cain that he still had a choice. He could still resist. He could control his anger before it consumed him. God had not abandoned him nor condemned him. On the contrary, he was giving him a warning, a way of escape. But Cain's heart was hardened. He heard God's words, but he did not accept them. He was so caught up in his own pride, so immersed in his bitterness, that he did not notice the divine hand trying to rescue him. And so, ignoring the warning, Cain slowly walked towards the point of no return. Cain's decision, God's warning, still echoed in Cain's mind, but not as a guiding light. Instead, he felt those words like a weight on his shoulders, as if God were favoring Abel and rebuking him. The anger that had once been a nagging feeling in his chest had now become an uncontrollable fire. He didn't want to change, didn't want to accept that the problem was within himself. For Cain, the real culprit was Abel. The days passed, but the rejection of his offering and Abel's acceptance continued to torment his mind. Every time he saw his brother tending the flock, every time he heard his voice praising God, his anger grew. Cain felt as if Abel was always one step ahead, as if his presence was a constant reminder of his own failure. He no longer saw Abel as his brother. He saw him as an obstacle, a rival who needed to be eliminated. It was then that a dark idea arose in his heart. He could no longer bear that feeling. He no longer wanted to feel inferior. Sin, that predator that God had warned about, was no longer just at the door. It had entered and taken over Cain, and now he made a decision of no return. With a calm, almost friendly tone of voice, he called Abel. "Let's go to the field." Abel, without suspecting anything, accepted the invitation. He had always trusted his brother. Since they were little, they had played and explored the fields together. There was no reason to doubt. The field was a place where they could talk, away from everything, just the two of them. But Cain had a plan. His steps were firm, his mind was determined. As they walked through the field, away from anyone's eyes, one thought dominated him. If Abel is no longer here, maybe everything will go back to normal. Maybe God will look at me. Maybe I will finally have peace. He did not realize that he was about to do something he could never undo. Something that would stain his hands, his history, and his destiny forever. Anger had blinded him, and in the silence of the field, tragedy was about to happen, the first murder in history. The sun shone high in the sky, and the field was silent, interrupted only by the sound of the wind blowing through the leaves and the rustling of the grass beneath the two brothers' feet. Cain walked beside Abel, but his mind was far from there. His thoughts were consumed by anger, resentment, and envy. Abel, on the other hand, was calm. His heart was pure, and he held no grudge against his brother. For him, that walk was just another moment between brothers like so many others they had shared since childhood. But for Cain, that moment was different. He had made a dark decision, and there was no turning back. Out of sight of anyone, surrounded only by the vastness of the field, Cain stopped. Abel looked at him curiously. "Cain, what is it?" The answer came brutally. Without warning, without hesitation, Cain attacked his brother. With a force driven by hatred and jealousy, he struck him. Abel tried to react, tried to understand what was happening, but Cain's fury was overwhelming. Each blow carried years of resentment. Each attack was the manifestation of a heart that had chosen the path of sin. Dust rose from the ground as Abel fell. The field, once a scene of life and harmony, now became a stage for tragedy. Abel's blood stained the earth, marking forever that moment in the history of humanity. For the first time since creation, death came not because of nature, not because of time, but by the hand of one's own brother. Cain breathed heavily. His body trembled. He looked around. No one had seen it. No witnesses. Only the wind continued to blow, as if the earth itself mourned what had happened. But Cain did not know that this crime, no matter how hidden it seemed, would not go unnoticed. Someone already knew. The land that received innocent blood cried out, and the heavens witnessed what had been done. The first murder in history had just occurred, and the silence of the countryside would never erase the voice that now cried out for justice. This story is powerful, and the lesson it brings is more relevant than ever. Many people need to hear this, so share it with someone who needs to reflect on the choices they have made. God confronts Cain. The field was silent. No human witnesses had seen the crime. Only the wind cut through the lonely landscape, and the earth, now stained with blood, seemed to hold back the scream that was heard by no one. No one, except God. Cain, still panting, stared at Abel's motionless body. What had he done? For an instant, a shiver ran down his spine. He felt the weight of the moment, but then his mind tried to find a justification. It wasn't my fault. If God had accepted my offer, if Abel hadn't thought he was better than me. He shook his head. It didn't matter anymore. Abel was gone, and no one knew. With a hardened heart, Cain went on with his life. He avoided looking at the field where his brother's blood had been spilled. He tried to act as if nothing had happened. But then, one day, something unexpected happened. A voice echoed. A voice he had known since he was a child. A voice that had given life to man and shaped the earth with his own hands. It was the voice of God. "Cain, where is Abel, your brother?" The ground beneath his feet seemed to disappear. His blood ran cold. But instead of surrendering to repentance, Cain, overcome by pride and rebellion, tried to dodge. His heart was no longer the same. He did not see God as a father who gave him a chance, but as a judge who wanted to condemn him. With a cold voice, he answered, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Those words came out of his mouth full of insolence. He knew exactly where Abel was. He knew what he had done. But in his attempt to hide the truth, he defied the Creator himself. The silence that followed was unlike any other. Cain felt a weight in the air, an invisible weight that seemed to crush his soul. He knew that God already knew the answer. God had not questioned him because he did not know, but because he wanted him to confess. But Cain chose to lie. And at that moment, Cain's destiny was about to change forever. Divine justice would be pronounced, and he would understand that Abel's blood could not be erased. For the earth cried out for justice, and God had heard the cry that no one else had heard, the voice of blood. The silence of the earth was broken, not by human words, but by the clamor of spilled blood. Cain had tried to hide his crime. He had lied to God, but there was no way to cover up what was visible to the eyes of the Creator. Then, God spoke again, and his words cut like a sharp blade. "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain trembled. His chest rose and fell rapidly, seized by an anguish he had never felt before. He wanted to run away, to disappear, but there was nowhere to run. The very earth, which had once given him sustenance, now denounced him. And then came the sentence. God looked at Cain and declared, Cursed are you from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under his feet. Cain, the farmer, the one who worked the land and made a living from it, now saw his greatest skill taken away from him. The soil, which had previously responded to his efforts with crops, would now become barren for him. No seed he sowed would germinate. No plant would grow under his care. He would lose what gave him security, what gave him purpose. But the sentence went further. Cain would no longer have a home. He would be a wanderer, a fugitive, someone without a fixed place to rest. He would wander aimlessly, always looking over his shoulder, fearing the judgment of others, feeling the weight of his guilt with every step. He tried to argue, tried to appeal for his own survival, but deep down he knew. He had chosen a path of no return. Abel's blood cried out for justice, and God had heard it. Now Cain would have to bear the weight of the consequences of his own sin. The land that had witnessed history's first murder now refused to welcome its assailant. And so Cain began his journey as a marked man, walking through a world where every shadow seemed to whisper his brother's name. Cain's despair. Cain felt a chill run down his spine. God's words echoed in his mind like distant thunder, each sentence weighing down on him like an impossible boulder. He could not turn back. Abel's blood had been spilled, and now the earth rejected him. His home, his safety, his livelihood, all was lost. His breath became ragged. The weight of the curse was crushing. His eyes, once filled with fury, were now filled with terror. What would become of him? Where could he go? My punishment is too great to bear, he cried, feeling despair take hold of his chest. The thought of being a fugitive tormented him. He knew that as he wandered the world, he might encounter other descendants of Adam and Eve. What if they recognized him? What if they discovered his crime? He no longer had the protection of the earth nor the security of a home. Anyone could kill him. He looked at his hands, still trembling, still stained with the shadow of spilled blood. He felt his stomach churn. How had it all come to this? The brother he had known since his mother's womb was now dead by his own hand. Cain wanted to run away. He wanted to disappear. But there was nowhere to run. He was alone. Alone in the world. So he looked up at God, trying somehow to seek compassion. Behold, today you have cast me out from the face of the earth, and from your presence I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. His cry was a mixture of fear and despair. For the first time, Cain was not angry. He was not justifying himself. He was broken. He knew that his fate was sealed, and that his existence from now on would be a constant escape, a life of restlessness and torment. He feared death, but deep down, he knew that his true punishment had already begun on Cain. The wind blew hard across the parched earth. Cain still knelt, his mind spinning, trying to comprehend the immensity of his doom. A fugitive, a wanderer, a man without a home, without roots, without a future. But in the midst of his despair, something unexpected happened. God, in his justice, had decreed the curse upon him. But now, with the same divine authority, the Creator did something that Cain could never have foreseen. God would extend mercy to the murderer. The Lord approached, and his voice broke the silence. Therefore, whoever kills Cain will be avenged sevenfold. Cain looked up, confused. What did this mean? He had committed the worst of crimes. His brother's blood had cried out from the ground for justice, and he had received his sentence. But now, God was talking about protection? Then the Lord did something extraordinary. He placed a mark upon Cain. Even after everything, God still had mercy on Cain. Does this make you think of anything? Tell me in the comments. What does this attitude of God teach us today? The Bible does not reveal exactly what this sign was. Perhaps a visible mark on his skin, a divine badge, something that men could see and fear. Or perhaps it was something deeper, something that manifested itself in Cain's presence, preventing anyone from daring to raise a hand against him. But one thing was certain: no one could kill him. Even in the midst of his punishment, even though he was a wanderer, even though he carried the guilt of Abel's blood, Cain would not be erased from the earth by human hands. The murderer who feared being murdered now had the guarantee of God's own justice. The one who had taken his brother's life would now have his own life preserved, not because he deserved it, but because God, in his infinite sovereignty, still offered a remnant of grace. But the mark was not just protection. It was also a reminder, an eternal reminder of his crime, his shame, and his fate. Cain could never turn back. He would carry his guilt not only in his heart, but in his very flesh. So he got up and left. History's first murderer went on his way, carrying with him the weight of his past and the mark of divine judgment. Cain's exile. Cain was alone. For the first time in his life, there was no family, no land, no home. God's voice had fallen silent to him, and the weight of separation burned more than any physical punishment could. With heavy steps, he walked away from everything he knew. The land around him seemed increasingly barren, as if creation itself refused to provide him with sustenance. The sun burned his skin, and the horizon was nothing but an endless void. He was heading into the unknown. The Bible says that Cain set out for the land of Nod, a distant region beyond the borders of Eden. Nod means wanderer or wanderer, and this name seemed to perfectly reflect his new destiny. He no longer belonged anywhere. Far from the presence of the Lord, he had to build a new life, but now without God's protection, provision, and guidance. He was a marked man, living like a fugitive, knowing he could never return. Silence was his only companion. Perhaps on some nights he would look up at the sky, trying to find some sign of the divine presence. But all he found was an emptiness that reflected the state of his soul. However, Cain did not disappear. He was not consumed by guilt, nor did he let himself die in the desert. On the contrary, he clung to life with an almost fierce strength. He found a place to settle and began to build something new. Cain had children, founded a city, and his descendants grew. He tried somehow to remake his history, to create a legacy, even though he knew he could never erase his past. But no matter how many walls he built, no matter how much he tried to establish a new beginning, he carried with him the mark of his crime and the memory of the land stained with Abel's blood. In the land of Nod, Cain learned to live without God, but never without the consequences of his choices. The Bible is full of powerful stories like this one, and here we tell them in a way that keeps you hooked from beginning to end. So subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because there is much more to come. Cain's legacy. Time passed. Cain, the wanderer, found a piece of land where he could settle. Far from his family and the presence of the Lord, he decided to create something that would mark his existence. He built a city, the first city mentioned in the Bible. It was a place where other strays, fugitives, and wanderers found refuge. He named it Enoch, in honor of his firstborn son. Perhaps that name was his attempt to erase the past, to start a new story. But the mark of his crime never left him. His legacy was stained by the same spirit that led him to kill Abel. Cain's lineage grew, and his descendants multiplied. Among them were talented and powerful men. His descendant Jubal became the father of those who dwell in tents and raise cattle. Jubal was the first musician, the one who played the harp and flute. Tubal-Cain was a great blacksmith, a master at working with bronze and iron. But with talent and innovation came corruption. Violence, arrogance, and revenge were ingrained in the blood of Cain's descendants. Among them, one name stood out: Lamech. He was the first man to take 2 wives, breaking the divine model of marriage. But most frightening was his thirst for revenge. He once killed a man and declared that his revenge would be 70 times greater than any other. Evil spread through Cain's line like a plague. The violence that began with the murder of Abel grew and took over that generation. However, God did not allow this corruption to dominate all of humanity. As Cain's lineage went further astray, Adam and Eve had another son, Seth. It was from Seth that a new lineage came, a people who once again called on the name of the Lord. The city of Cain prospered for a time, but its legacy was marked by blood, pride, and disobedience. The story of Cain teaches us that one man's choice can echo through generations. What began as a crime in the countryside spread like a shadow over his descendants, and in the end, Cain built a city, but he never managed to rebuild his soul. The promise continues. The birth of Seth and the hope of redemption. The world was still young. The Garden of Eden no longer belonged to Adam and Eve, but the memories of that perfect place still echoed in their hearts. They walked the earth, now hard and scarred by the sweat of hard work. Sin had entered the world, and with it pain, loss, and separation from God. Humanity's first great tragedy had occurred. Cain, overcome by jealousy and anger, shed the blood of his own brother, Abel. The cry of that blood rose to heaven, and Eve's heart broke in mourning. As a mother, she saw the death of one son and the destruction of the other. Cain was cursed and fled far away, becoming a wanderer, separated from the presence of God. Eve felt a deep emptiness. This pain was something she never imagined she would face, and Adam, already aged by the weight of years and suffering, supported his wife, trying to find comfort in the presence of the Lord. But God had not forgotten them. He still had a plan, a promise. The Creator never leaves his work unfinished. Then came the divine answer. Eve became pregnant again, and when the baby was born, she held him in her arms and felt something different. It was as if God's mercy was there, renewing her hope. She looked into the eyes of the little one and, full of gratitude, declared, "God has granted me another son in place of Abel, whom Cain killed." And they named him Seth, which means appointed or granted. Seth was not just another son. He represented the continuation of God's promise, a renewal of faith. As Cain's descendants strayed further and further from the Lord, Seth would bring with him a different lineage, a lineage that would seek God. The years passed, and Seth grew up. He learned from Adam about the Creator, heard the stories about Eden and the sin that separated humanity from God. But above all, Seth understood that God had a plan to redeem humanity. And it was from this lineage that generations later, Noah was born, the one who would find favor before the Lord in the midst of a corrupt world. And much later, from this same lineage would come the Messiah, the one who would crush the head of the serpent and bring salvation to all humanity. The story of Seth reminds us that even in the face of tragedy, God always has a way. He restores, renews, and never lets his promises fail. Hope did not die with Abel, but lived on, because God was already preparing the way for the redemption of humanity. And so, the promise remained firm, because God never forgets those he loves.